Hello, everyone. Hello, hi. Hiya.
Hi, Izzy.
Hiya. Okay. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Okay, well, this is it, of course. Um, this is wholeness, so to speak. So, what is an apparent body sitting on a chair, listening to Izzy, breathing, asking questions on the laptop is all there is. So, what is just naturally whole and complete, one could say, and just naturally perfect, just as it is. Nothing could be added or taken away for it to become more whole and complete, more what it is. So nothing could and nothing needs to be added or taken away for it to become more of what it is, more whole and complete. And so, of course, that one could say is all that's being suggested here. But in and of itself, of course, it's not a message. There is no message. There is no teaching, no advice, no method or path. And so one could say that these apparent meetings or apparent talking seems to come as a response, one could say, to this so-called experience that seems to claim that I am here and that I am real and I have a life and I am happening. And of course, this is an illusion. There is no one. So there's no one inside the body, there's no one as the body, and there's no one outside the body. There just is no one. And there never has been, so to speak. So no one needs to or possibly could die or fall away or collapse or explode into boundlessness. Of course not. No, there is already no one. And so, for the so called individual, this can seem, on the one hand, very attractive and maybe relaxing or whatever. Of course, that's just what appears to be happening. But on the other hand, this can seem quite threatening, one could say, because this is it. There is nothing better or worse than just what appears to be happening, sitting on Zoom. So anyone's welcome to add to that, to comment. Yeah, have a chat, ask questions, whatever comes up. There's no right or wrong. And so you're welcome to just unmute yourself, type in the chat, whatever you want to do. Yeah, let's see what happens this morning. Okay, in the chat, how about love? Well, of course, what is unconditional love. Yeah, which is another way one could say that it's wholeness, that it's whole and complete, that it's perfect, just as it is. Yeah, it's unconditional love, which is nothing, which is death. In the chat as well, do life and death go hand in hand with each other? Of course. I mean, in this sense, neither exist. There is no life or death, or one could say that what is simultaneously life and death. Yeah. I mean, of course, life and death are just concepts, just words. Sounds a bit more dramatic to say this is death than this is life, but of course, they're the same thing. Yeah. More dramatic for the person, it would seem. Death seems quite dramatic and scary. But of course, it's no more dramatic or strange than saying this is life. Okay, in the chat as well. Does apparent mean there is no reference point? Well, of course, it doesn't mean anything really. Of course, none of the words mean anything of this so-called message. I mean, of course, there isn't a message, but so all of these words, boundless, energy, nothing being everything, life, death, apparently, don't mean anything, of course. This isn't pointing to or even really suggesting anything, of course. So when I say, or when one says there's an apparent suggestion or an apparent body, the apparent suggestion, of course, is that it's just not an actual suggestion or an actual body or an actual Zoom call or an actual question or an actual laptop, whatever, just apparently. So one could say this word sort of seems to allude to the fact that it's just neither real nor unreal. So sitting on Zoom, apparently sitting on Zoom with Izzy, just can't be said to be definitely happening or definitely not happening. There's just nothing or no one who could just say or confirm either way. Is sitting on Zoom actually happening? Is it not actually happening? It's just what appears to be happening, what's apparently happening. And this seems to be of course, this seems to be the part that the apparent individual can't grasp, will never grasp. Of course, there isn't one in the first place to grasp or not grasp. But as a story, of course, the so-called individual seems to live in the world of black and white, right and wrong, good and bad, real, unreal, total duality, has to be one or the other. This apparently seems to, one could say, be the whole of the so-called message. And just nothing is, it's just what appears to be happening. Which of course me seems to hates that sort of uncertainty, one could say. It wants to know, apparently. And so, of course, in this sense, one could say that then obviously does suggest there's no reference point. I don't know if those two tie up in that way, sort of with the wording of the question, but of course there is no reference point. So yeah. So one could say if the apparent person is trying to use this, it seems to try to use this right and wrong, good and bad, real and unreal as a reference point. Yeah. So, okay, sitting on Zoom is real. Okay, that can be my reference. There's a lot of this isn't conscious in that sense, but I can, go from there. I can stay on top of this and know what this is. So yeah, there just is no reference point. There already is no one trying to work out if it's real or unreal. Yeah. Okay, it's another one in the chat. There is no one. Now what? Well, exactly. This seems to be the apparent experience of the person, is the person seems to be this constant, now what? What's next? What are we doing next? What's the plan for tomorrow? Of course, there's nothing wrong with this. It's just what appears to be happening. But energetically, for the so-called person, this seems to be this restlessness, one could say, this agitation. What's next? Even it can become more subtle on the so-called spiritual path. What meditation is next? What meta practice can I do next? Whatever it is. How can I let go more? And there is no one, full stop. There's no now what. Okay, in the chat, what do you think about this being human thing? Well, I mean, there's no one that's even asking this question, of course. Yeah. I mean, the one that would analyze or want to think about this fascinating human body or being or whatever is dead. So totally normal, of course. There just seems to be an apparent human being, an apparent body. And totally normal, apparent functioning. Drinking, eating, walking, seeing friends, going out for dinner, watching TV, just total normality. And even this thing that would think it's pretty cool or it's pretty mysterious or wonderful or magical is dead. There's just plain and simply just what appears to be happening. There's no mystery about it. There's no depth to it. Okay, in the chat. Hello, Izzy. My son, 7 years old, constantly says, "What are you doing next?" Ah, and in a sense, we make the same before the body died or the illusion of the person drops. Exactly. Yeah. So this sense of me, one could say, I mean, of course it's not there, but as a story it never changes, of course, in this apparent setup. So the apparent setup of me never changes. That's what I sort of mean by that. So your son saying, or a child saying, "What are we doing next? What are we doing next?" is exactly the same, of course, as the apparent adult. I mean, the adult might not verbally express, like a child, "What are we doing next? What are we doing next?" Like the child would probably actually say it, because that sort of filter of what's normal to say or what's socially accepted sort of isn't necessarily there yet. But of course, it's exactly the same so-called setup as the apparent adult body thinking, maybe, instead of saying, "What next? What next?" Or it's not even necessarily a thought. I mean, it just seems to be this energetic agitation of that there has to be or needs to be or is something coming next that I have to plan or be ready for, or I have to initiate or know, or whatever. So exactly, totally the same as the child saying that, and in its sort of sense of this energetic sense of waiting for something or needing something in the future. Yeah. Okay, another one in the chat. What resonates with the message is something else than the mind. The human psyche doesn't awake. It needs practical work to change to the state that is wanted by the apparent individual. I think here is where comes the apparent growth and change. What resonates with the message is something else than the mind. Well, one could say, of course, there is no mind. There is no such thing as mind or body or anything, of course. There is no such thing as anything. But one could say, as a story, this resonance that is spoken of does seem to be an unconditional yes that is just beyond the thinking or the feeling, or even, I mean, one could call it a sense, but of course there is no sense. I mean, it's totally indescribable because it's nothing. So it's just not even a thing. Like everything, nothing is a thing, nothing being everything. But this resonance, the apparent person, just, that's all it can really say about it. It's a resonance, or it's just it's totally intangible. It's not even a thing. And the human psyche doesn't awake. It needs practical work to change to the state that is wanted by the apparent individual. I think here is where comes the apparent growth and change. I'm not sure I really understand, but of course, there is no awakening. So nothing awakes or falls asleep again or whatever. There is no human psyche that does or doesn't awake. There is nothing that awakens. There is no awakening or liberation. It needs practical work to change to the state that is wanted. Yeah, I don't really understand, but no, there's no work is needed or could be done. There is no growth and change. I mean, there may be apparent growth and change, but that's just what appears to be happening. There's no state. I mean, different states, different feelings, different experiences, whatever, are just what appears to be happening. Of course, there is no experience, but for want of a better word. Yeah, no, nothing has to change. Nothing could change. This is all there is. How does learning happen when there's not knowing what's right or wrong? I'm at a school and they teach what is good or bad for a human body. Well, of course, yeah. This seems to be what appears to be happening, is a lot of so-called bodies teaching what is right or wrong. And of course, there's nothing wrong with this, but it's just total and utter. I mean, it's just totally, I'm hesitant to say garbage. I mean, of course, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just what appears to be happening, but there just is no right or wrong, good or bad. I mean, there might be apparent good or bad, you know, all this scientific evidence about what's good for us and what's bad for us. But I mean, there already is no one making these choices. And as a story, this whole thing just seems to then become another thing the individual has to try and protect itself from. This is bad, this must be avoided. This is good, this must be put on a pedestal, or whatever it is. I mean, it just turns into another religion, another set of rules, another thing to follow that seems to be the way to do life or how to approach life. Yeah. There is no approach to life. It's totally impossible. I mean, not even there's no approach. There just is no one who could approach life if there was. There is just life, boundlessly life. So how does learning happen when there's not knowing what's right or wrong? Well, of course, learning doesn't actually happen. There is no actual learning. I mean, there's, as I say, there's apparent right or wrong. So there may be going to school, doing a course, learning about the human body, apparently learning about the human body, apparently learning about history, about science, whatever it is, but there's nothing in it. So learning is just learning. And there's no beginning to it and no end, and there's not, yeah, of course, it's totally purposeless. So the sort of, well, the motivation to learn, I mean, seems to just totally have collapsed here. Which is just another word for I'm quite lazy. Okay, in the chat. Laziness happens here too a lot. I'm loving it. It's just the body laying down in a sense. Nothing more, nothing less. Mine sometimes goes, do more, work harder, but I'm sustaining my life and it's just what it is. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, one could say this after the apparent liberation, this sense of needing to do, needing to be, needing to achieve still seems to sort of linger in the system, one could say. So, of course, the apparent individual is dead, but the body still seems to habitually sort of behave in this quite neurotic way. Not being able to rest, to relax, to be constantly thinking of what to do next or to plan. I mean, of course, this isn't about resting or relaxing. It's just what appears to be happening. So agitation, restlessness, anxiety, but also peace, rest, lounging in the sun. Yeah. Yeah, lazing around is just lazing around. Of course, the apparent person would probably feel guilty for this. But yeah, there is no one to feel guilty or not feel guilty. Is that because of apparent conditioning? One could say so, of course. Yeah, yeah. So this apparent liberation, and then this so-called individual dies, or of course doesn't actually, but as a story, an apparent death that never happens. And then there's seems to just be this body that then, as you say, because of this conditioning over however many years of this so-called illusion to be someone, the body still seems to behave quite agitatedly, one could say, as if it were someone almost. But this just seems to be relaxing, one could say. As in, it just slowly, these conditionings and neuroses just seem to just fade and just subtly, I mean, or suddenly collapse, or subtly and slowly just relax. But it's just like anything, it's just what appears to be happening. And there's, of course, no one bringing this about or trying to relax or make the neuroses fade. Yeah, totally impossible. And it doesn't matter, of course, either. This one that it would have really mattered to, that the body was relaxed, is dead. So the body may remain tense, and that's just, I mean, just a tense body then. It's not neither better nor worse than a relaxed body or whatever. Okay, in the chat, I think this is following on from question earlier. I meant that everything is the same for someone who heard the message or not. Things happen naturally to the body. This message is useless for the person, but something else happening that is life itself, the unknown. Of course, yeah. One could say, I mean, there is no message, of course. So there's just totally, I mean, there's no one listening to this. There is no one. So of course there's no advantage to sitting on Zoom with Izzy versus doing the shopping or going on a walk. Yeah. And this apparent message is totally useless for the apparent person, or totally useless, full stop. What is totally useless. Not a very good sales pitch. Okay, in the chat. I heard Tony say the person seeks an experience when he suicides. I agree with that, but it's the last experience of the person. Can you tell more about that, please? I agree with that, but it's the last experience of the person. Can you tell more about that, please? I mean, well, of course, obviously the first thing to say is that this apparent message doesn't suggest that anyone should or shouldn't do anything. I mean, of course, the apparent person can hear a communication such as this and think, oh, well, the quickest way to get to what Izzy is talking about is just to take one's own life. But of course, I mean, there's nothing being suggested here. But of course, that's not being suggested. That would be a misunderstanding, one could say. But of course, like you say, one could say the person really is seeking their own death constantly. So whether this may turn into explicitly seeking through taking one's own life, actually taking one's own life, or, as in suicide, or through other things, the person more commonly and less so-called dramatically seems to seek their own death through substances, through sex, through experiences, objects, money, relationships, jobs. There's no difference between seeking suicide or seeking death through suicide, so-called suicide, and seeking death through money or through sex. It is exactly the same absence, one could say, that the person seems to be seeking, to lose oneself in something, whatever. So I'm not too sure what you mean by I agree with that, but it's the last experience of the person. Maybe in terms of this thing with actually taking one's life seems to, for the so-called person, seems to be this last right almost. That, if it all gets too much, then at least, I have this one last thing I can just do. And so, of course, this is the biggest form of hope, of course. Suicide is the ultimate hope, like everything else, like seeking money. Of course, suicide to the so-called person, even just speaking about it, can seem, like it's a lot more dramatic. Or because this whole idea of actual death sounds totally traumatic and devastating for the so-called person. So, of course, suicide is hope, hoping for something better, hoping for the end, hoping for death. There is no death. Or this is death already. Apparently sitting on Zoom is death. In the chat as well, the person who commits suicide is illusory as well, in the sense we are talking about here, i.e. no one ever suicides. Suicide happens as everything else happens. Exactly, yeah. There is already no one who could or who could not do this. But of course, as I say, this isn't suggesting that anyone should or shouldn't do anything. The so-called person would hear this perhaps and think, well, if this is death, I may as well, or whatever. There is no one already who could or couldn't do this. This is death already. Apparently sitting on Zoom is death. Hey, in the chat. Many times during meetings, my body seems to get so tired and sleepy, and I actually fall asleep. Oh, is it that bad? And I fall asleep almost every time. Yeah. Just what's happening, I assume. Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, not meant that way. No, I'm joking. But I mean, I remember I used to find this quite relaxing and quite reassuring, one could say. And sort of, it seemed like the only thing that could just sort of, I just listened and it just would sort of have a soothing effect in some way. I mean, of course, that's not, well, it just seems to be what's happening. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing right with that. But obviously I quickly turn this, and the apparent person seems to do this, turn this into a sort of therapy. If I was feeling a bit anxious or there was a lot of pain, I'll just listen to Andreas. And there was sort of this love-hate relationship, one could say. It's sort of, sometimes it would help feel a little more relaxed or a little more at ease, and other times it just would be the worst thing in the world to listen to. There is no liberation. There is no end. So this seems to be the apparent loop of the person. Sometimes it's, oh, great, there is no end, brilliant, oh, that's lovely, the birds are outside, the sun's shining, great. And then other times, this pain, fear, and there is no end. And then, not interested. Tell me something else. Give me something I can do. Or to feel better, or to have something, or anything. Yeah. I mean, a total story. But yeah, there you go. Okay, in the chat. When you don't speak to anyone in Zoom, what do you perceive then? No persons. Well, I'm not sure if you mean when no one actually speaks in terms of a voice and it's just in the chat. But I mean, there is no perceiving. I mean, there are no persons. There is no one. So whether there's typing in the chat or apparently responding, or whether there's an apparent voice talking on the laptop, there is no one. And there's no experience of me speaking to no one. No, of course not. There is no me. There is no other. So this whole sort of game of the perceiver, the perceived, and the perception, or me, the speaking, and you I'm speaking to, it just totally collapses. I mean, of course, it's not there anyway. It seems to be this apparent illusion that seems to begin with me, that I am here, I am listening, and Izzy is speaking. No, there is no one. So this whole triad of so-called experience is totally illusory already and never happens. And so I don't perceive there being no one. There just is no one. I don't perceive. I am dead. Okay, in the chat. What kind of food do you eat? Do you eat cooked food and meat, or only vegetables and fruits? Sorry. Do you think the energy of food has an impact on the energy of the body? Many people associate this topic with awakening. Yeah, I mean, what is your opinion? I mean, well, of course, there is no opinion. I mean, the one that would care or would have this opinion is dead. I mean, but of course, yeah, I mean, this apparent person. Sorry, there's just another one in the chat. My wife wants to know if you like spaghetti and meatballs. Well, you're making me hungry now. If you're offering. But I mean, of course, the so-called person would use anything as a path, a so-called path or a so-called religion. And so, yeah, as you say, a lot of people seem to associate anything with these so-called awakenings. But yeah, food does seem to be one. Having the right diet, not eating this, only eating this, not eating meat, being a vegetarian or a vegan. I mean, whatever, of course, there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, there's just natural preferences, one could say, but it seems to run so-called deeper than this for the person. It seems to be something morally associated with this. If I don't eat meat, then I'm a good person. Or whatever. I mean, it ends up being really, if I don't eat at all, then I'm a good person. I mean, totally boring. And of course, this total so-called dreamlike thinking process, hoping that if I do this, something good will happen. Or if I am good, something good will happen. I mean, of course, this whole thing of good or bad, right or wrong, just totally collapses. And so, no, I don't just eat fruit and vegetables. Thank goodness. Just totally normal. The body eats what it wants. This one that would care or control in this way is dead. I mean, there's no difference between the apparent person saying one should eat this and not eat that, and saying one needs to have this job and not that job, or one should have a drive in life, or one should be relaxed, or have this relationship or that relationship. I mean, they're just all questions the person seems to ask out of life. Okay. Couple more in the chat. What if your job is telling other people what they should eat? In the apparent life. Well, I mean, if that's your thing. No, I'm kidding. I mean, yeah. But no, in a way, of course, if that's what the body seems to do, is have a job as a nutritionist or whatever, then that's just what appears to be happening. Of course, this isn't saying that's wrong, that one shouldn't tell someone what to eat, or one should. There is nothing wrong with anything. But of course, this interest in nutrition, or telling other people not even what they should eat, but telling other people anything in that sense. You should do this. I mean, this one that would care or could do this already doesn't exist, is dead. You should do this. You should do that. No, I mean, there's no one. There is no one. There's no one who could say that, or there's no one who could tell anyone else to do or not do something. There is no one to tell. Totally unconditional freedom already for no one. Okay, in the chat, would you say all fear is the fear of death? I mean, one could say so, of course, yeah. I know this can be quite a common thing in sort of so-called spirituality, that all fear is the fear of death. I mean, so one could say so as a story, but of course there is no death. So to actually take this as an actual, that all fear is the fear of death, it seems quite sort of existential and deep to me in many ways. So of course not actually, but one could say that what the so-called individual seems to be avoiding is its own death. Yeah, in that way. And so, I mean, spirituality would probably take this and sort of, if there was an anxious body or whatever, would then, you know, maybe anxious to publicly speak or something, would say, well, that's the fear of death. Well, I mean, maybe it's just the fear of public speaking, but I mean, so this is what I mean in the sense it seems to go like this claim seems to take things quite deep when there is no depth. But of course, one could say as a story that what the individual is constantly seems to be avoiding, I would probably say, is their death. But at the same time, also, of course, longing for that death. So again, it's that same closed loop, illusory loop. And so the ironic thing one could say is the person seems to fear this death and long for this death, so to speak, or avoid this death. But of course, this death is already the case. So I guess with this thing that all fear is the fear of death, it might be like implying there's an actual death, and there isn't. This is death. So of course, this fear is also illusory. And there's nothing to fear in that way. Nothing bigger or deeper or in the future, some big black hole that you're going to be swallowed into or whatever. The individual creates all these stories about death, heaven, hell. Yeah, it's just this. And if sitting on Zoom with Izzy is the fear of death, then I apologize. Okay, I'll take one more in the chat because we've gone over slightly. So, but sometimes it appears the body refuses. Oh, we're back on the food. But sometimes it appears the body refuses some kind of food. Lately, I can't drink coffee or eat meat anymore, and I've never decided to stop them before. Well, I mean, of course, there is no response. It's just what appears to be happening. Of course, there's no meaning in that. It doesn't, like anything, it doesn't mean anything. The body no longer drinks coffee or no longer eats meat. That's just what appears to be happening. like everything, there is no deeper reason. Oh, well, the body's not drinking coffee or eating meat because of whatever. It's on a detox, or it's awakening and realizing there's compassion for all beings. Oh, I mean, no. There is no because to that question or to anything. There is no why. Okay, this is it. This is everything. So sitting with Izzy, apparently sitting with Izzy on Zoom for an hour or so, listening, breathing, typing is all there is. And it's naturally whole and complete, just as it is. So the next meeting will be next Wednesday, as usual, at 6 p.m. BST, which is British summertime, which I believe is 1 p.m. EST, American Standard Time, Eastern Time anyway. And then next weekend, this time next weekend pretty much, there won't be this usual hour meeting because I'm running the Zoom intensive, which is basically this, of course, but just a little bit longer. So we do a 2-hour call in the morning and a 2-hour call in the afternoon for Saturday and for Sunday. And yeah, there's a nice little group that are coming, gathering, sort of have registered already, and everyone's welcome. So if you'd like to be a part of it, just drop me an email. I can send you the links. And then in the summer, in the end of July, the 28th of July, I'm going to be talking in person, which is quite exciting, in Brighton, the UK. So I'm going to start compiling a list for that as well. And yeah, that's a weekend again. So if you'd like to be on that list, let me know. We can sort that out. Okay, for now then, have a good week and see some of you soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Izzy.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, Izzy. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Izzy.
Thank you. Bye.